You need a theory of change.
It gets people involved in politics.
Has anyone had any problems with
How are you going to bring in
I want to talk about three things. First of all, the question itself about whether we should be using online tools at all and their role. Second, about the non-technology part. That is, whether we need organizations or spontaneous networks are better. And third, I want to talk about the case of Joanne Delaney. First of all, technology. The debate itself about whether we should use the technology is a sterile debate, which I think everyone has agreed on. It's not either or. It's not whether you should or should not use technology. Serious activists use every technology at their disposal whenever time they're doing it. If this were happening a century ago, we could theoretically have had a debate whether to use telegraphs or emerging telephones. And probably people did at one point say, telephones aren't as good as face-to-face conversation. We shouldn't use them. But those people were morons. So that was that's not actually in my original text. Some people also made the argument, and the book, by the way, The Victorian Internet, published a decade or so ago, was terrific on this point. People actually believed the telegraph had changed the world beyond recognition, that with the telegraph, news spread at the speed of light. We instantly knew what was happening on the other side of the planet. The world would never be the same again. Well, serious advocates of social change use every technology at their disposal. There's nothing to debate. I do want to talk about the question of organizations versus spontaneity, because this came up in some of the arguments that were being made in some of the background materials we were reading. There is this idea that individuals using tools like Facebook and Twitter are apparently out of nowhere creating mass movements that are bringing down dictatorships that have existed for decades, out of nowhere. And this is absolute nonsense. And the people who write this kind of stuff either completely misunderstand the technology or know nothing at all about the country they're discussing, or both. Now, I was in Egypt a year ago, in Cairo, as a guest of the Center for Trade Union and Workers' Services, the CTUWS. And this is an organization that was set up in 1990, 21 years ago, to campaign for workers' rights and human rights in Egypt. It was involved in the last 7 or 8 years in a massive and unprecedented strike wave throughout Egypt that involved millions of workers, not thousands, millions of workers have been on strike on and off for about 7 years in Egypt. Tens of thousands poured into the streets on a regular basis. 2 years ago, 10,000 protesting Egyptians occupied the street in front of the Prime Minister's office for 3 days in a sit-in. 10,000 Egyptians in an authoritarian society occupying the streets for 3 days. So when those thousands of dissidents and independent trade unionists took over Tahrir Square in Cairo and then basically shut the country down with a wave of general strikes, it was the culmination of years and years of struggle and organizing. Now, during the entire time I was in Cairo, no one mentioned Twitter or Facebook even once. That doesn't mean they don't use such tools. They do use those tools, but they would have overthrown Mubarak even without them. Now, if we look at the region today, we can see that one of the very big differences between what happened in Tunisia and Egypt and what's happening in Libya is that Libyan civil society was underdeveloped and poorly organized. The Libyans never had a Center for Trade Union and Workers' Services. They had no tradition of strikes. They had no underground organizations of workers that were unions in the making, none of it. They were not well organized, and they were not well placed to overthrow their dictator. We understand in the trade union movement, and I'm guessing that there aren't many of you here who are trade union activists, but we understand in the trade union movement that organization is everything. People here can sneer at bureaucratic processes and composite resolutions or whatever, but the reality is the trade union movement understands something about changing the world because it's been doing it for a long time. And we understand that tools like Facebook, Twitter, email, instant messaging, the web are tools, and they're the tools we use today. I want to talk concretely about the case of Joanne Delaney. As an example, in the autumn of 2005, Dunn's Stores, which is apparently a notoriously anti-union chain of department stores in Ireland, sacked 22-year-old Joanne Delaney, who was a trade union rep. She represented a union called Mandate, which is the second largest union in Ireland, unrecognized by the employer. And the reason why she was sacked was she wore her union pin to work on her uniform. She had just been named a shop steward, a union rep, and her boss told her, her line manager said, take that pin off or you lose your job, so she lost her job. The union had very few tools at its disposal to deal with the problem. The company was intransigent. There was no strong power base within the company. There was very little they could actually do. And after literally months of doing nothing, they turned to us at Labor Start and said, could you do one of those newfangled online campaign things you guys do, whatever it is you do with those computers. We waged an online campaign. We flooded Dunn stores with thousands of messages. And that is not the interesting part of the story. It's not that we did an online campaign to flood them with messages. It's what happened next. A staffer in the House of Commons, someone who worked for a Labor MP, emailed me and said, would you mind if we introduced an early day motion? Would I mind? Let me think about it. An early day motion was introduced. This got the attention of also the Scottish Parliament, where there was actually a debate took place. At that point, Labour Party members of the Irish Dáil in Dublin decided it's absurd they're discussing this in Edinburgh and London, but not here in Dublin, so it was debated in Ireland's own parliament, and then the Dublin City Council debated the issue as well. Then picket lines began going up to the stores, and within 2 weeks, the online campaign had triggered a wave of protest in the real world that compelled the employer to think again about what it was doing. And then one evening, I got a text message from the union in Dublin telling me to go online and look at the RTE evening news, the 6 o'clock evening news. And there was Joanne Delaney standing on the street in front of Dunn stores. If I could imitate the way Irish people speak, I would, but I can't. But, I mean, I could, but it would be embarrassing. And she said, look, she was in broad grin on her face, and she's wearing her little pin, and she's saying, apparently I've gotten my job back, and I'm told there was this massive international campaign on the internet that did this. Now, I often tell this story to audiences of trade unionists. This is the normal audience I would speak to. And I tell them it's an example of what happens when you combine the power of new technologies with time-honored tactics of trade union solidarity. And what you do is you create the possibility of actually changing the world. Thank you.